Out in the wild, danger doesn't always give a warning. In the deep woods, along lonely rivers, and across unforgiving mountain passes, people have found themselves face to face with one of nature's most powerful predators, bears. Whether it's a sudden charge, a territorial clash, or a deadly misunderstanding, these true encounters reveal how quickly peace can turn to terror. From solo hikers to seasoned hunters, each story is a raw account of survival or tragedy. In this video, we'll explore 6 real-life bear attacks that show exactly what happens when man and beast collide. On July 9, 2022, the sky above a quiet valley in the northern Rockies held the last colors of daylight as 3 friends walked a narrow trail surrounded by tall grass and cliffs. Maya, Thomas, and Eric had been planning this hike for months. They were all in their 20s and loved wild places. Maya worked as a nature photographer. Thomas was studying outdoor survival, and Eric spent most weekends exploring trails with his dog back home. They carried light packs, bear spray, and small knives, thinking the biggest challenge would be the rocky climbs and cold nights. That morning, they started early, hoping to reach a small lake deep in the valley by sunset. The path led through patches of thick forest, where fallen trees blocked the way, and loose rocks made every step a test of balance. Birds chirped above them, and the wind moved softly through the trees. Eric walked ahead, checking the map periodically, while Maya took photos of the flowers growing near the trail. Thomas stayed behind, watching the rear. As they came around a bend near a patch of scattered bones and torn brush, the peace was broken. Just a few steps ahead, a huge shape moved in the grass. It stood up fast. A grizzly bear, large and strong, rose on its back legs and let out a deep, shaking sound. The animal had been guarding a kill hidden in the brush, and now it saw them as a threat. Its body was covered in dirt, and its eyes locked onto them with wild focus. Without a pause, it lunged forward. Eric turned to run, but tripped on a branch. The bear slammed into his side, claws slicing across his leg. He screamed and crawled backward, pushing himself toward a nearby tree. Maya froze in place while Thomas stepped between her and the charging shape. The bear snapped its jaws and paced in circles, staying close to the kill but not moving far away. Eric used both hands to pull himself up the trunk, climbing just high enough to hang onto a thick branch. Blood ran down his pants. His foot slipped once, but he held tight. On the ground, Thomas reached for the spray and held it out. The bear moved closer again. Its head was low, and its breath came fast. When it charged once more, Thomas fired a quick burst of mist into its face. The smell filled the air, but it only made the bear angrier. It slammed into a tree, cracked a branch, and roared at full force. Maya shouted and waved her arms, trying to keep her eyes away from Eric. For a moment, the bear turned, then charged again, this time toward Thomas. He stepped aside just in time, falling to the ground. The bear's paw swiped at the empty air where he had been standing seconds before. The fight for survival had only begun. Thomas rolled across the ground as dust rose around him. His hands searched for anything sharp. He found a small stick and held it out in front, knowing it would not be of much help. The bear kept circling, growling low and steady, eyes flashing between him and Maya. Eric stayed hidden in the tree, one leg hanging loose, holding tight despite the pain. Leaves trembled as the heavy animal stepped closer to Thomas again. Maya moved slowly behind a large rock, waving her hands to draw the bear away. It noticed her and rushed forward. She threw a handful of dirt to distract it. For a second, it stopped. Thomas stood, holding a flat stone. With a quick step forward, he slammed it down near the bear's feet. It backed off slightly, then circled again, snapping twigs under its weight. The group had no clear path to safety. The cliffs were steep behind them, and the forest was too thick ahead. Eric, high in the tree, called out weakly. His leg was bleeding badly, and he could not climb down. Maya and Thomas stood side by side now, both gripping small items they had picked up from the ground. The bear seemed tired, but its anger had not faded. Hours passed. The sky turned dark, and the air grew cold. The bear would not leave. It charged again, brushing past Thomas and knocking him off his feet. His arm hit a rock, and he cried out in pain. Maya stepped forward quickly. In her hand was a short blade from her pack. As the bear turned, Thomas forced himself to stand once more. He reached out, swung hard, and struck the bear across its shoulder. A loud sound filled the valley. The animal stepped back, surprised. It sniffed the air and paced in a wide circle. Thomas stood still, chest rising and falling fast. The bear looked one last time, then turned away. It moved slowly toward the woods, its heavy body dragging through the tall grass. The danger had passed, but none of them felt safe yet. Maya rushed to Eric's tree. With care, he climbed down, using her shoulder for balance. Blood stained his pants, and his face was pale. Thomas walked beside them, holding his hurt arm close to his side. The valley was quiet now. Only wind moved through the trees. The hike back took hours. They stopped often. Eric could barely walk, and Thomas's steps were uneven. At last, they reached the trailhead where other hikers had set up camp. They were helped right away. A clean cloth was used to stop the bleeding. Eric was taken to a hospital the next day. News spread fast. People discussed the fight and how long it had lasted. Experts explained that bears can become aggressive when defending their food, especially during periods of hunger. Maya, Thomas, and Eric healed slowly. They never forgot the day the wild nearly took their lives. On May 3rd, 2022, soft moonlight fell over a quiet homestead tucked deep in a forest near the Blue Ridge foothills. A man named Alan Mercer, age 58, lived alone in a hand-built wooden cabin. Years ago, he had left city life behind, opting to live off the grid among the hills and trees. Alan grew vegetables, raised chickens, and collected rainwater in barrels. His land was peaceful. His tools were old but strong, and his days followed the sun. Nights were calm, and animals like foxes and deer often passed by. Alan had raised chickens for years. He kept them in a small coop just steps from his cabin, feeding them corn and greens. His hens laid eggs daily, and their soft clucks filled the air each morning. Over time, Alan made the coop with strong wire and wood planks. It had never been broken into before, but that spring had been dry, and wild animals were moving closer to homes. Some neighbors had seen broken bins and missing pet food. Alan heard rumors of bears coming down from the hills, but he had not seen one himself. That night, a loud crash shook the quiet air. Alan sat up quickly. He grabbed a flashlight from the table and reached for the old shovel near the door. Stepping outside barefoot, he walked fast toward the coop. The smell of feathers and dirt was strong. When he reached the small enclosure, he came to a halt. The door had been ripped open. Wood splinters were on the ground. Inside the shadows stood a large black bear. It had one of his hens in its mouth and another crushed beneath its paw. Alan shouted, stepping forward. The beam of the flashlight hit the bear's face. The animal spun fast, its eyes locked on him. With a deep grunt, it dropped the hen and charged. Alan raised the shovel in both hands and braced himself. The bear's front paw came first, slamming against the metal. He managed to block the strike, but the force threw him backward. He hit the dirt hard. The next blow came fast. Sharp claws raked across his shoulder. One loud crack echoed in the air as his wrist bent under pressure. The pain was sharp, deep, and sudden. Covered in dust and blood, Alan stopped moving. He lay still, his face down in the grass. The bear hovered over him, breathing heavily, its nose close to his back. Seconds passed like hours. Then slowly, the animal grabbed a flapping hen in its jaws and backed away. Its heavy steps faded into the woods. The coop was silent. Feathers floated through the air, landing softly on the ground. Alan opened one eye. His side burned. His arm hung limp, but he was alive. He had no time to rest. What came next would test his strength more than anything else. The danger had passed, but the fight to survive was not over yet. Alan rolled onto his side, holding his broken wrist close to his chest. Blood seeped through his shirt, mixing with dirt. His legs shook, but he pulled himself up little by little. The pain in his shoulder was sharp, but he forced his feet under him. With every small step, he moved toward the cabin. The door stood open, a faint light inside. The air was cold, and the sounds of the forest had returned to normal, but the fear in his chest stayed. Once inside, Alan used his elbow to shut the door. He leaned against the wall, breathing hard. His left hand was useless, and his right arm barely moved. He found a clean towel with his foot, pulled it up, and pressed it against the worst of the wounds. The cloth turned dark quickly. He sat on the floor, head leaning back, and closed his eyes. His heart beat fast, but he stayed awake. He knew he had to reach help soon. After some minutes, he stood again. One slow motion at a time, He found his keys and dragged himself to his old truck parked near the shed. The vehicle was cold, and his fingers struggled to turn the key in the ignition. The engine coughed and started. Alan held the wheel with one hand and drove carefully, guiding the truck down a narrow dirt path that was full of dips and turns. The road felt endless. Sharp bends, bumps, and roots shook the wheel. Trees passed by like shadows. 14 miles later, the small ranger outpost came into view. Faint lights glowed behind the windows. He honked once, slumped over the wheel. 2 workers ran out when they saw him. They opened the door, lifted him out gently, and laid him on a bench. One of them checked his wounds while the other radioed for emergency help. Alan's face was pale, and his eyes half shut, but he stayed conscious. Later that night, medical crews arrived. Bandages were wrapped tightly. His shoulder was stitched. They cleaned each scrape, gave him medicine, and kept him under warm blankets. They told him later that the damage had been bad but not fatal. He would need time to heal. Muscles would ache for weeks. Bones needed rest, but he would recover. The following day, a group of wildlife officers visited his home. They found marks on the wooden frame where the bear had clawed. Feathers were scattered all around the empty pen. Footprints led from the coop into the woods. The team believed the animal had been fed by people before. It no longer feared houses or humans. Signs were posted across nearby roads. Extra patrols were added in the area. Alan's property changed after that night. Metal bars were added around the chicken run. A siren system flashed red lights and made loud sounds when motion was near. Neighbors came by to offer help. Some left food, others tools. Alan said little. He kept to himself, but his steps grew stronger again. And though the trees remained quiet, the memory of that night stayed. On May 26, 2021, in the heart of central India, thick green forests surrounded the crumbling edges of an old forgotten temple. Shreya Kamat, a 33-year-old nature explorer, had arrived early that morning. She had always loved old places and wild trails. Living in Mumbai most of her life, Shreya found peace only when far from tall buildings and noisy cars. For years, she had followed her passion, visiting jungles and ancient ruins, often walking alone with a camera, notebook, and map in hand. She had planned this solo trip for weeks. The forest around the old temple was known to be quiet, with faded stone paths and moss-covered walls. Some people called it haunted. Others said wild animals slept there. Shreya had read stories about birds nesting in the temple towers and monkeys resting in its halls. She wanted to capture something rare and peaceful. That morning, she wore sturdy boots, carried a lightweight backpack, and had a camera strapped to her chest. Her water bottle was full, and her mind was calm. As the sun reached high above the trees, she walked slowly through a shaded trail. Vines hung low, dry leaves cracked beneath her steps. The air was still. She passed broken pillars, faded carvings, and wild bushes growing from cracks in stone. Her camera clicked softly as she took short videos of butterflies and lizards darting through the undergrowth. Just past noon, she reached a large arch made of black stone. Part of it had collapsed long ago. Behind the broken rocks, something dark rested in the shade. It looked like a curled shape lying still, maybe a large animal sleeping. Shreya paused. She thought it might be a wild pig or even a stray cow. She raised her camera slowly. Her curiosity peaked, but her caution still intact. She stepped forward, her boots silent on the soft ground. The shape did not move. Her heart beat faster, not with fear but excitement. Another step, then another. Just as she drove near the edge of the broken arch, the shape exploded to life. A large sloth bear shot forward. Its dark fur shook off dust as it rose on strong legs. With a loud growl, it slammed into her, knocking her backward. Shreya hit the ground hard, her backpack absorbing most of the fall. The bear bit into her side and dragged her across thorny bushes. Her arms flailed as she tried to stop the pull. The camera slipped and broke on a rock. Sharp claws tore through her pants, cutting into her legs. The thick straps of her bag slowed the attack, but pain rushed through her back as more blows landed. Dirt flew into her eyes. Leaves were stuck to her face. She screamed, hoping someone, anyone, might hear her. The animal let out one more roar and turned. With heavy steps, it ran into the thick brush, crashing through trees. Shreya lay still, breathing fast, legs aching. her body scratched and bleeding, and deep in the green shadows, silence returned. Blood marked the rocks around Shreya's body as she lay between sharp roots and dry leaves. Her breath came in short gasps. The forest stayed still. Her eyes blinked slowly, fighting to remain open. Each part of her body hurt. Her legs burned with deep cuts. Her back felt torn. One of her shoes was missing. Dust filled her mouth. She could barely move, only turn her head slightly. The broken camera lay in pieces a few feet away. The air was warm, but her skin felt cold. A loud bird call echoed above the trees. Far in the distance, branches moved. The bear was gone, but the fear stayed close. Time passed, though it felt like hours. Her fingers moved slowly, reaching for the thick straps of her backpack. She pressed on it, trying to sit up, but her muscles were weak. Her vision blurred. Something inside her pushed her to stay awake. The pain in her legs grew worse. A group of farmers from a nearby village had been walking along a trail used to gather wood. They heard strange cries coming from the ruins. At first, they thought it might be monkeys, but then they heard a louder sound, one that made them hurry. They moved through the brush, stepping over stones, calling to each other without shouting. One of them spotted a red cloth near the old arch. Then they saw her. She was carefully lifted and placed on a sturdy bamboo stretcher. Her skin was pale. She could not speak but opened her eyes once. They carried her gently over broken paths and across small streams. The journey to safety took nearly an hour. By the time they reached the main road, a small truck had already been called. Dust rose from the tires as it rolled over gravel. The clinic was small but clean. Nurses wrapped her legs with clean cloth and washed her wounds. They removed thorns from her arms. A doctor gave her medicine to stop the pain. She rested for days, waking slowly, remembering bits of the forest. Each movement was hard. Her wounds were not deadly, but they left scars that would stay. Her body needed time, but her mind was already thinking about what had happened. People visited and asked her questions. Forest officers came too. They knew sloth bears used temple ruins to rest, especially when the heat was strong. They warned others not to approach such places without caution. Warnings were posted at the edge of trails. Talks were held in villages to explain the significance of animal signs and safe paths. Shreya recovered. Her arms and legs moved again, but she did not return to the ruins. Her story was shared online. She spoke at schools, telling people to respect wild places. She said not everything in the forest is meant to be photographed. The stone arch still stands, but fewer people pass through it now. In the silence, only the wind moves. The lesson it gave her will not fade. On August 9, 2021, cold winds swept over the wide rivers of Kodiak Island, where the salmon run had reached its peak. The fast water was filled with fish pushing upstream. Nearby, along the muddy edge of one branch of the river, a 41-year-old man named Ethan Caldwell moved through the brush with slow steps. Ethan had spent much of his life hunting and exploring wild lands. He grew up in northern Idaho and had learned to track animals from his grandfather. He was known for being careful, strong, and focused in the wilderness. That year, Ethan traveled with a hunting partner to a far part of Kodiak, far from roads or cabins. They came by boat and carried everything on their backs. Their goal was to hunt large game before winter. The island was full of thick woods, wet ground, and fast-moving streams. It was a hard place to walk, but rich in wildlife. For 2 days, they followed signs of elk and watched bears feeding on salmon. One morning, they spotted a large male Kodiak bear feeding near a pile of fish remains. The animal stood tall and heavy, its fur damp and its head low as it tore through the pile. Ethan knew what he was looking at. He carried a high-powered rifle and moved slowly along the edge of a fallen tree, trying to get a better view. The wind blew toward him, which helped hide his scent. His partner stayed back about 50 yards behind him, kneeling between thick shrubs and watching carefully. The two men had talked about the risks of this area. They knew Kodiak bears could be fast and dangerous. As Ethan took a step toward a rise in the ground, a small branch cracked under his boot. The bear lifted its head at once. Its dark eyes locked onto the movement. Without waiting, it rose to all fours and charged with speed that surprised even Ethan. He brought the rifle to his shoulder and tried to aim. The bear covered the distance quickly, its paws slapping the ground and its body low like a moving wall. Ethan fired one shot. It missed. He tried again, but the second round also passed wide. Before he could try again, the bear was already upon him. Its full weight slammed into his chest, knocking him flat. A loud sound echoed over the water as the two collided. The bear swung its heavy paw and struck him hard in the side. Bones broke under the blow. Ethan tried to move, but the animal attacked again, its mouth and claws landing with great force. His partner, frozen in shock, could only watch from far away. He called out, then tried to reach for his gear, but the bear was still active and dangerous. In just seconds, the quiet valley had turned into a place of fear. The scene was not over. The bear remained close, pacing and growling. Help was far away, and the river kept flowing. The bear stood near the edge of the river, its thick fur stained with blood and its breathing loud in the cold air. The animal did not run off as most bears would. It stayed close, pacing near the body and looking toward the nearby trees. The man hiding in the brush, Ethan's partner, held still. His hands shook. He knew he could not help. The bear was too strong, too close. The seconds passed slowly as he waited for any chance to move. The sound of the water was broken only by the deep growls of the bear. It sniffed the air and moved back to the pile of salmon. Still tense, it circled the spot where the attack had happened. The man hiding could not leave. He had no signal on his phone and no way to call for help. He waited with his back against a tree, his breath coming in short gasps. The hours crawled by. After some time, the bear walked a little farther from the body. The man waited longer just in case. Only after the animal disappeared behind a patch of brush did he move. He crept slowly from his spot and crawled across the ground toward Ethan. His face was pale when he reached him. The body was still, the chest no longer rising. There was nothing more he could do. His friend was gone. The man backed away and climbed to a small ridge. He found the radio they had packed in their gear. The antenna was weak, but he tried again and again, until he picked up a faint reply. He gave their location with a few words. Then he waited again. The bear had not returned, but the fear stayed heavy. The sun had dropped behind the hills. Cold wind passed through the trees, and the shadows grew longer. A search team arrived many hours later, flying in with a small helicopter that landed on a nearby flat area. They moved carefully, following the signs of the struggle. They found the torn gear scattered across the riverbank and the body lying near crushed bushes. Blood had soaked into the dirt. Pieces of clothing were shredded. The bear had left behind large tracks and marks in the soft ground. The men checked the scene and spoke with the survivor. They carried the body out in a covered bag, then cleared the area for safety. The man who had escaped rode back in silence, eyes fixed on the floor of the aircraft. He spoke little. His voice was flat. He had seen something few people ever witnessed. The wild had shown its hardest side. In the days after, people heard about what had happened. News of the attack spread. Wildlife officers marked the site and warned others not to enter the area during salmon season. The man who survived stayed quiet for a long time. He no longer hiked alone. The memory followed him like a shadow, and the weight of the moment never left. On June 9, 2023, the mountain roads winding through the thick forests of the Caucasus were quiet as evening settled. A young traveler named Tomasz Ilyin was driving alone along the narrow pass. He was 24, with a love for adventure and solitude. Born in a small town in Eastern Europe, he had always enjoyed long road trips and wild places. His van, though old, had been his home on wheels for months. Inside, he kept canned food, simple cooking tools, and his camera equipment. He liked to camp where others rarely went. That afternoon, Tomasz had driven high into the mountains. The trees grew dense, and fog began to hang between the branches. Not far from a bend, his van started to make strange noises. The engine stalled. He attempted to restart it several times, but was unsuccessful. Light faded quickly. With no signal on his phone and no traffic passing by, he knew he had to wait until morning. He parked by the edge of the road, pulled out a blanket, and made a small fire a few steps from the van. As night deepened, he ate a meal of bread and packaged meat, placing the leftovers inside a cooler in the back of the vehicle. He zipped up his jacket and crawled into the back of the van to sleep. The sky above was filled with stars, but the forest around him was silent and dark. Just past 3 in the morning, a loud crash jolted him awake. At first, he thought it was falling branches, but then came the sound of heavy breathing and metal bending. He sat up and looked through the windshield. A large brown bear was beside the van. Its fur was thick, its back broad, and it moved with strong, slow steps. The animal sniffed around the vehicle and then began scratching the side panel near the cooler. Tomasz shouted and hit the side of the van. He turned on his headlamp and flashed it toward the bear. He even grabbed 2 metal pans and hit them together. Nothing worked. The bear seemed unbothered by the noise. It continued pulling at the side of the van, claws digging into the door seam. In seconds, the door gave way. The bear's head pushed through the opening, and it began tossing out blankets, boxes, and gear. Food wrappers flew in the air. The cooler cracked open. The smell of meat filled the cold air. Knowing he could not stop it, Tomasz ran toward the nearest tree. It stood tall with low branches. He climbed quickly, pulling himself higher until he reached a safe height. From there, he watched as the bear moved through the camp, crushing bags and tearing through everything it touched. The night was long, and the danger had only begun. Tomasz stayed still in the tree, gripping a thick branch with both hands. His heart beat fast, and his breath came in short bursts. The wind blew gently, moving the leaves around him. From the tree, he could see the bear's shadow still moving near the van. Its large body shifted from side to side as it dragged bags, chewed wrappers, and broke containers. The sound of tearing cloth and crunching plastic filled the dark air. His van was no longer a shelter. It had become a broken shell. Below him, the bear kept moving from one side of the camp to the other. It clawed at the back tires and pushed the broken cooler with its nose. The food smell had drawn it in, and now it searched for more. Tomasz pressed his back to the trunk and watched, afraid to move even a little. He could feel the rough bark digging into his jacket, but he did not shift. Every snap of a twig made him flinch. After some time had passed, the bear slowly wandered away. It moved toward the trees, stopped once to sniff the air, and then disappeared into the forest. Still, Tomasz waited. He did not trust the silence. Hours seemed to stretch like whole days. His arms ached and his legs felt numb, but he stayed up high, listening. The sky turned gray, and early light touched the leaves above. Only then did he begin to climb down. The ground felt soft and wet under his shoes. He stepped carefully, checking every shadow. The fire had gone cold. His van stood nearby, the side door hanging open, the roof dented. Inside, blankets were torn, gear scattered, and food ruined. Scratches marked the metal. Deep dents ran along the side, and one wheel was flat. His tools had been thrown out of the boxes and lay across the dirt. He picked up what he could and placed it in a torn bag. His hands shook as he cleaned up pieces of wrappers and broken items. There was little left that worked. His camera was cracked. His water bottle was empty and full of dirt. He sat on a rock near the road, waiting, unsure of what to do next. Later that morning, a truck passed along the forest road. The driver stopped, saw the broken van, and helped Tomasz climb in. The man drove him to a nearby ranger station. There, Tomasz told them what had happened. They took notes and gave him a warm drink. Wildlife workers said that bears in the area had become increasingly bold. Food waste and litter had taught them to search near roads and camps. Tomasz returned home a few days later. He kept a part of the van's torn panel, marked by deep claw marks. It now hung on a wall in his room as a reminder. He no longer kept food in the open and never camped near roads again. What he had seen in the dark would stay with him always. On July 22, 2022, the sharp peaks of a remote mountain range stood tall under a bright summer sky. In the cold wind, 3 climbers moved slowly across a narrow pass high above the tree line. Among them was Alex Morozov, a 36-year-old man from the northern edge of Europe. He had climbed mountains since his teenage years, training on snow-covered slopes and icy cliffs. Alongside him were Pavel and Ren, both skilled in alpine routes and wilderness survival. The trio had planned this multi-day climb for months, selecting a lesser-known trail that was far from the regular paths. They had begun early that morning, leaving behind a small camp tucked below the ridge. Their backpacks were filled with ropes, ice tools, dried food, and small tents. The trail was steep, and the cold air carried the scent of pine and stone as they reached the pass. A wide stretch of rocky land opened before them. Snow patches dotted the ground, and large rocks made each step a slow one. The view was clear. Peaks stretched across the horizon, and silence covered everything. As they moved ahead, Pavel raised his hand to stop. Not far from the edge of a sloped bank, something large moved. A heavy shape hunched over a spot near the rocks. It was a full-grown grizzly, dark and powerful, feeding on a fresh kill. The deer lay in the open, blood staining the pale ground around it. The bear's head dipped and lifted, muscles tense as it pulled at the meat. The climbers froze, staying low and quiet, hoping not to be seen. They whispered no words and backed away carefully, trying not to disturb the scene. But as they turned, Alex stepped on a dry twig hidden beneath thin snow. The snap echoed like a shout through the still air. The grizzly lifted its head, mouth red, eyes fixed on the noise. In one motion, it roared and charged. The bear crossed the space with shocking speed, scattering stones under its paws. Alex threw out his arms and shoved the others away from the path. He stood in front for only a second before the bear slammed into him. The force threw him to the ground. The animal rose onto its hind legs and shifted its weight. Claws raked across his back and legs. Pain shot through his body, and his limbs bent under the pressure. Pavel and Ren rushed forward, shouting and throwing whatever rocks they could find. The bear turned its head but continued on its way. For nearly 5 minutes it circled and growled, swinging its body between the injured man and his friends. Blood stained the stones. The wind carried the cries and crashes through the pass. At last, the bear backed away, its heavy chest rising and falling. It looked toward the meat it had left, and then moved slowly back to the kill. The men stayed still. Alex lay broken on the ground. The worst had passed, but help was still far away. Alex stayed on the ground, his face pale and chest rising slowly. His clothes were torn, and red marks were visible on his arms and legs. One boot had come off during the struggle, and his foot rested bare against the cold rock. His friends knelt beside him, checking his pulse and trying to keep him awake. A soft moan escaped his lips, and his eyes blinked faintly. The bear was no longer close, but its heavy shape still moved near the far end of the pass, feeding again. They could not risk another moment near it. Ren unzipped his pack and pulled out a thermal blanket. Pavel lifted Alex's head gently and slid the cloth under his back. Together they covered him and made a quick plan. There was no signal on the pass, but the highest ridge a short distance away sometimes picked up faint radio waves. Ren left his food bag behind and ran uphill with a small transceiver, while Pavel stayed behind to watch for movement and help Alex stay calm. Each minute passed like an hour. Ren climbed fast, legs burning and lungs sore. When he reached the top, he turned on the device and slowly rotated the dial. After 2 tries, he caught a weak line and sent out a call. He provided coordinates, mentioned the injury, and waited for a response. The crackle of a voice came through. Help was on the way. A team with a rescue chopper would try to reach the pass before the sun dipped low. Below, Pavel placed a rolled jacket under Alex's neck. He watched the bear with sharp eyes, tracking its steps. The animal showed no more interest in them, staying near the fresh carcass, but the fear stayed thick in the air. The rocks still held signs of what had happened. Dark stains, scattered tools, and bent poles. Alex breathed slowly, his limbs twitching now and then. After more than an hour, the faint hum of a distant machine echoed across the mountains. Ren returned fast with his hands waving. A speck appeared in the sky, growing larger as it crossed over the jagged peaks. Dust and snow flew in all directions as the helicopter lowered. 2 medics stepped out fast and ran toward the group. They checked Alex's body, wrapped his legs, and lifted him gently onto a flat board. The aircraft rose again, moving steadily toward the nearest clinic down in the valley. Pavel and Ren followed on foot, later taken by another group of rangers. At the station, doctors cleaned each wound. His ribs were cracked, and his arm was broken in 2 places. Deep cuts ran across his back and side. They stitched him with care and gave him strong medicine to rest. The days ahead were long. Sleeping was hard, and moving even harder. Alex stayed in the ward for several weeks. He spoke little but listened when people visited. His hands shook when he touched the mountain gear again. The doctors said he would be able to walk without pain in time. But the high slopes and snowy cliffs now carried new meaning. His name was added to local reports as a reminder that nature must never be taken lightly, even by those who know it well.